their focus, it was about nurturing a community in an intergenerational way. And this because of the relationship with Will and Mihi, and then Mihi was friends with Moana Theodore, and the project got the interests of a certain Richie Polton, who leads New Zealand's foremost longitudinal study. Nobody here from Christchurch study. I don't think you like that. And Richie said, "You're doing something really, really novel here, right? But you're just doing it, right? It's not being documented." So what happened is that this amazing project about community development, intergenerational community development through early childhood education, right, started to become the subject of community-driven research projects to document what was going on. And they ended up with 6 or 7 projects, including life course projects. And but they were all driven by the egg, right? And including data collection, everything else. So the National Centre for Life Course Research, where Moana Theodore is at Otago, and Richie's group were there just to kind of support and enable this community group to do what they wanted to do. So the centre was called Te Kaupai Piripono, and that was started in 1994. And what they did is, with that links with Otago, they ended up to get funding to actually do this work in association with the National Centre for Life Course Research. And when they started getting all these projects, it was apparent that they were doing different. And they're doing different in a way that needed to be recorded for themselves, but also doing different in a way that others could possibly learn from. And so what we did was we approached them saying, "We've got a life course project here, but one of the things that could come out of this small investment is a documentation of what you're doing, the value of it, and a framework that could inform 3 things. First of all, is future research programs, right? Secondly, is their own research program as it emerges, and thirdly is to create a framework that could aid the interpretation of other existing longitudinal studies. Now, the most relevant, of course, is growing up in New Zealand, right, where they are now with the rejig of growing up in New Zealand. They are very much focused on what works for the community and being able to put a kaupapa Māori-informed lens on the data that they're collecting and future data collection. And in fact, MSD, the funders for that project, for growing up in New Zealand, are looking at that specific. Right? They're looking for a project that, a life course project that can do that. So that's what they were funded to do. They were funded to coalesce and their work and distill kind of the essence of a framework out of it. The reason I'm not talking about any results is you can read about them. They've already published that in September in the Royal Society Journal. And Barry, it'd be great to be able to send a link to that or a copy of the article.
I can send that around.
Yep. At the moment, it's a bit behind a firewall. Can you?
I can bring it out from behind the firewall.
Yeah.
As long as there's no one here from the Journal of the Royal Society. And send it. Really?
Oh, and well, actually, Moana was on the board of the Royal Society, so but what they've done, really simply, is they've come up with a life course model that is kaupapa based, right? And there it's got 8 different stages. He said urgently looking to see what the stages are in this article. Here we go, right? And they start from the potential of parenthood, right? And then they go to infancy, right? Early childhood, adolescence, young adulthood, right? Middle adulthood, the age and beyond. So it actually goes beyond Yeah, and the reason, and then in the article, they actually compare this model with the standard Pākehā model. And what is really interesting about that is, first of all, this model is built on a whole lot of Māori scholarship, right? Published scholarship, Indigenous scholarship. But secondly, it's very functionally based, right? It's role based. It's not age based. Right? And so what that means is that when we're beginning to look at the application of this model, right, we actually had to start looking at social networks, people's roles in with whānau families, right? And it becomes a little bit more complex, but it becomes a hell of a lot more interactive. So one of the real values I see in this work is its potential to inform a whole lot of future work, including but not limited to growing up. Because now with this kind of very kaupapa informed model of kind of kaupapa informed model of functional kind of life course steps, we can actually start unbundling and looking at existing data in a different way, but more importantly, collect data in a different way, right? And start talking about interdependency, so that when we're actually looking at IDI data, right, we're looking at households, but we might also be looking at inter-household interdependencies. And just as a nice little round off, when we're doing the COVID modeling, that's the big gap. And now that we're actually working with communities in doing that COVID modeling, we're saying we can't actually understand that public health level outcome unless we can understand the social networks functioning part of it. So read the paper, but it's important to actually have know the history of where it's come from, right? And the people that it's involved with, and the fact that it's deliberately intended as a legacy project to actually create something that others can build from, as well as the Taranaki Whānau Research.
Can you say anything about the outcomes of those attempted papers?
Yeah, that's within the six, 7 studies that I've done. Right.
So
So
broadly.
yeah. Oh,
You said there's some obvious differences.
right. Yes. So the obvious differences, just in terms within the aging framework. Well, first of all, it goes beyond the lifespan by the range, right? Secondly, there's a distinction in adulthood between young adulthood and older adulthood that is very role based in terms of having an active leadership role. Right? So it's in those functions, right? So there's a nice little table in there which actually just describes them, but basically it's about the different social roles, right? And so it's not just being a older person, but being an older person, go from being an older person.
I understand the framework.
Yeah.
Is there a description of the outcome of these children as they go through these stages?
That is in some of the other work, right? Not in this particular paper, but there are page references to that work. But they did a retrospective study of people who have been involved with this early childhood work and some workforce at a whānau and intergenerational work. Whānau and intergenerational level. And what they're finding is that the program that engages the children in an intergenerational whānau orientated way, right, has big impacts on the children, but enormous impacts on the whānau, right? Because of anything from encouraging behaviour to improving networks to supporting the existing networks beyond the whānau. It was absolutely brilliant. Yeah. So the links are in the paper, in that main paper.
Just relatedly, Andrew, maybe Maggie has been doing some work for our centre in Australia on Indigenous. And she's developed a paper which I haven't looked at yet. She's developed a concept called life rules approach, which is kind of a Indigenous approach that takes an environment and context in very different ways. So it'll be interesting to see this paper in relation to what Maggie says.
Actually, that's a nice little segue, was that Maggie Tahu was involved in the section in the sociology conference or congress and World Sociology Congress in Melbourne that was talking about those Indigenous life worlds, and the collaborator in that is Tahu, which is the cousin of the so that's on there actually. I think.
Yeah, she's only just sent me a draft. We're going to publish it in our working paper series on our website, but it will go into a so we'll publish everybody that she also.
Wonderful, thank you.
Any other questions about that? It's a fantastic work. I know when I was talking to Richie about it, he heard them speak, and at that time the Dunedin study had just been putting out some papers on the importance of self-control in childhood, the life course impacts of self-control. And when he heard the presentation, he thought, you guys are talking about self-control. We should work together. And so things have developed from there.